Welcome, everybody. I'm Joe Booth. I'm the founder and practice director here at Class 5 Mind, and I'm really excited to have a special guest with us tonight. Every week for the month of October, we've been having different events, and this week we're going to be going deep in the subject of brain health and nutrition. And you're probably wondering, hey, isn't Class 5 Mind a different program around sobriety? So what does sobriety and diet have in common? Well, our approach to holistic recovery is really around an integrative process for sobriety. It's not about just taking out the addiction or the addictive behaviors and throwing it out the door. It's about replacing it with something good, because addiction is very powerful, it's very strong. And when you remove it, it leaves a void. So what we try and do at Class 5 Mind is introduce good, healthy behaviors that are going to help fill that void and also help with the balancing of the emotional stress that you deal with when you are finding sobriety, because I know that sobriety isn't just about the substances or the behavior. There's a lot of underlying issues there, like trauma, stress, anxiety, and everything that comes along with that. So what we do with Class 5 Mind is we take this 5-prong approach of meditation and breath, emotional intelligence, cognitive priming, sleep, and well-being. And what we're going to be doing today, going deep on brain health and nutrition. And it's going to be an interesting topic, because what we know is that what we put into our bellies doesn't just go out through our body. It actually makes its way up into the brain through a process called the gut-brain axis, which has a lot to do with our microbiome and our nervous system and our hormones and all sorts of really cool, interesting stuff that we could go super deep in. But it can also really be simplified by putting healthy things into our body to make sure that we're getting the best output that we possibly can. So at Class 5 Mind, we help people track their diet and their nutrition with our habit tracker. We have a routine that we go through in an 8-week intensive that helps establish the baseline for the type of lifestyle that you want to live. And like I said, we have an expert on this topic with us today, somebody that I'm super excited about. She probably got the best and the coolest title I've ever got the pleasure of speaking with somebody. Neuropsychologist. It encompasses really the things that I'm super into, which is neuroscience and psychology, all in one title. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Lokker to talk to us a little bit about what a neuropsychologist is, the things that she's doing. She's opened up brain centers. She is deep in academia. She's done TED Talks. So we have a real expert on with us today. So gang, we want to make sure that you're getting your questions answered. So please write those into the chat. And as they come in, I'll ask those questions. And if there is something that is relevant, I think I might double click on it and ask Dr. Lokker to explain a little bit deeper. So with that, Dr. Lokker, thank you so much for coming. The show is yours.
Really honored to be here. And I didn't know much about your story, Joe, or Class 5 Mind before we met just a few weeks ago. And I just feel like we both have very similar missions, very similar visions, and very similar foundational strategies to really get to holistic healing. My main thing is in terms of prevention, early intervention, and restoration of cognitive issues. But I also use this same formula for treating mental health issues, for just cognitive optimization. I've also treated autoimmune disorders like MS and lupus. So I'm going to talk about diet and brain health. I'm a neuropsychologist, and basically what that is that I went to a lot of school. I got my PhD in clinical psychology, and then I also took all the med school classes for neuroscience, and then really have specialized in brain, body, brain behavior connections for that. All right. And so I'm going to tell a little bit of story just to give a little bit of background for me. I am an academic. And so after I got my PhD, I was a professor at University of Alabama. Any roll tide roll. I don't even know if you guys know what that means. I didn't until I moved down here. But I was there at the flagship university for 4 years. And then I went into academic medicine at UAB, which is kind of the Mayo of the South. And I worked there for 12 years and then went to um, the VA as well. And what I started finding in working as a neuropsychologist is that most of the brain issues, it was more of a diagnose and audio. So people would come in and either they would have subjective cognitive complaints where they feel like they're not right, but they can't really, put their finger on it, can't be diagnosed yet, or they had mild cognitive impairment. And if that was the case, basically what conventional medicine would do was, well, there's nothing wrong now. Why don't you come back when there is something wrong? And then when people came and there was something wrong, there was really nothing we could do. We would give them a pill, such as Aricept or Diazepam, and it basically doesn't work. And in fact, a meta-analysis conducted a couple of years ago in 2018 showed that people who were taking the 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 Aricept and Diazepam actually did worse than people who didn't take it. And so basically we're in fact possibly making people worse rather than better. And so I got really frustrated with conventional medicine, and I've always been really into health and fitness and food. And I was also trained as a health psychologist. So I really felt like there should be a marriage between neuropsychology and health psychology and our behaviors. And when I started to broach that to my colleagues that were in conventional medicine, I was really kind of met with a lot of resistance. And so I continued my position at the VA, but I also opened up the Brain Health Institute. I partnered with an integrative physician, and with that, we really worked to look at the root cause problem of all these brain health issues, and then helped people using more lifestyle medicine and other approaches to getting at the root cause to prevent, to restore, and to stabilize cognitive function. And we really didn't know where it would go when we started, but all of our patients either stabilized, and those were the ones that really were far into a dementia already, had already stepped into a dementia, or we actually restored function. And I think 5 years ago, we didn't even know that we could really do that. So someone would come in with memory impairment, and after being on the program for 6 months to a year, it would actually improve. And then those that were seeking prevention, these were typically people who knew that they had the gene for Alzheimer's disease. That's the ApoE4 allele for Alzheimer's disease, from like doing like a 23andMe or something like that, and they find out that they have the Alzheimer's gene. So they're very worried. And so we would do a prevention program with them, or someone who had a strong family history or had seen a loved one go through dementia would come in, and those individuals were actually improving. And that's not typical. As we get older, we typically decline in cognitive function just as a general rule, but most of our individuals were actually improving on cognitive measures. So it was really a passion project. And then I was recruited out to Seattle last year to open the Brain Health and Research Institute, very similar name, but it was different. And I was there for just a year, and now I've returned to academic medicine. I'm back at UAB, and what was met with resistance 5 years ago, I'm now innovative, and they want me to build out the program here. So I'm really excited that this is starting to be accepted, and that more and more literature is out there saying that what we put in our bodies, what we have around our bodies, all those things that Joe has been talking about in terms of, those class 5 mind, those pillars that he discusses, they all have influence on health and healing and brain health.
Dr. Lokken,
So,
just to jump in for a second, because I think it's
yeah.
so important. First of all, thank you for bringing this to the conscious awareness of the masses. Uh, a meta-analysis, just so everybody knows, this is like a study where they combine lots of studies. So it's not just one isolated study with one control group. The meta-analysis is when we look at a large amount of studies and crunch all this data. And the Aricept piece really hits home for me. My mom was diagnosed with Alzheimer's when she was 55. She died when she was 62. And you want to talk about trauma. I mean, watching somebody at that age, basically, I use like a metaphor of like a leaf on a tree that just withers away and then falls off the tree, lands on the ground, and just like crumbles up into the wind. Like that's what it was like that's the visual that I've associated with my mom's disease. And then then my stuff sort of spiraled with my addiction, and there was so much around that with the trauma. And I take this stuff so seriously, like to the point where my wife is sometimes like, hey, I think you need to like tone it down a little bit. Like I would say like borderline unhealthy, with almost like an obsession around what to eat, when to eat, how to avoid it. I found a place of balance now with it. But while I was doing a lot of the research and reading every book on this subject and listening to every TED talk for years, I was kind of going around in circles on this. So I'd love to just find out from you some, like, just some simple things that people could do, because this subject is so deep, right? Like, how do we just find simple solutions to this such complex and important issue that affects so many people?
Yeah. Well, first, I'm so sorry for the loss of your mom. And you're right. I mean, Alzheimer's is just the most devastating disease. I mean, you just lose everything. And so that's why my mission is so passionate, that I think that we can prevent this. Like, I think this, I think we can have just a different outlook in terms of brain health for the future. And it does really distill down to habits and rituals. And I know that Austin Perlmutter spoke about this. And so, really, it can be very simple, and you don't have, like, I mean, if you eat one bad thing, you're not going to get dementia. I think it's like following that 80-20 rule, where 80% of the time you're really treating your body well, maybe even 90% of the time if you feel like you're a little bit more at risk, or have a vulnerability, but that you relax, with yourself about 10 to 20% of the time, and just be able to, engage in life in a normal way.
Yeah, totally. Almost to the point too where I was like, man, maybe I might be doing more damage with the stress about what I eat than just, like you say, doing that 80-20 and relaxing a little bit and being like, hey man, you
Yeah.
gotta live. Sometimes it's okay to have a little dessert, you know,
Right.
little chocolate
Exactly.
cake is
Yeah.
good
There
for
are
you.
times, for pie.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah. So anyway, my mission for BHI, I've now pivoted to more of an online educational resource, because I can no longer see direct patient care, because I'm now at UAB seeing direct patient care. So I really hope to build out more webinars and courses and things like this. So if you guys have any interest or any ideas, I would love to hear your thoughts on it. But my mission is just to empower people with the knowledge to achieve optimal brain health, both in treating disease and maximizing potential. And we work to prevent, stabilize, restore cognitive decline. And here's some contact info, and I can send out these slides at the end. I just want to also give a disclaimer that anything that I say has no reflection on UAB at all. I'm doing this through the Brain Health and Research, or Brain Health Institute, and that this is just for education and information, and that obviously everyone should rely on their physicians or a nutritionist or dietitian for dietary advice. But this is the beautiful things that you should be eating for brain health, and we'll get into that a little bit later. I'm going to first walk through what is my brain health model of intervention, which is very similar to what you do, Joe. And then I really want to discuss the role of the gut microbiome, in particular for addiction. And then I think we can kind of have a healthy discussion in terms of drilling down on brain healthy diets. Does that sound like okay?
That sounds great. I remember when I watched your TED talk, the acronym right here. I love it. Health. Okay, go for it.
Yeah, and I think everyone has their own acronyms or their pillars, and they all really are kind of foundationally the same. The one thing that I really wanted to do by talking about this model first is that you need all of these things kind of to work together. Nothing has to be perfect, but you really have to touch on all these different areas. I think we know that we can't really exercise our way out of a bad diet, after so much time. And just because you're eating super healthy, if you're not sleeping, if you aren't, taking care of your emotions or your stress, if you're, filling yourself with other toxins or around in a toxic environment, you really can't have true health. And so really touching on all these things, that healthy eating, emotional regulation, whether it be just mindfulness meditation and gratitude, and or if it's really treating more serious issues like depression or anxiety or bipolar or what have you, you really need to have that within balance. And then activity and leisure is really important as well, not only in terms of exercise, where I think this is probably a crowd that exercises. I don't always speak to crowds that exercise, but you all look super fit. And I think that's great. But then also having enjoyable activities. And right now, I think the sense of community and the sense of like having those enjoyable activities is really different during the time of COVID. But everyone, in terms of like that activity, it also encompasses having joy, purpose, meaning in your life. And we know that people thrive so much better when that's present. The L is for learning strategies, especially for brain health. And I know a lot of a lot of people say, oh, do crosswords, things like that. We also have found that there are other things that you can do, more complex activities that really help in terms of keeping your brain active and strong. And so if the joy, purpose, meaning is like an engaging activity where you're thinking and, producing thought throughout the day, or you could learn a language, play an instrument, learn to quilt, learn to do digital photography, but just keeping your brain active in those ways is really great. There's also an online program called Brain HQ, and it's one of the most it's kind of like Lumosity, but there's much more scientific research with it. So it's kind of these brain games online that you can keep your brain active with, and it really helps in terms of processing speed, which is kind of more of a red flag in terms of brain health. Toxicant reduction, I'm going to talk a little bit more about that with the gut microbiome, but I do think that this is super cutting edge right now in terms of how toxins really affect us in terms of health and disease. What we put in our body, what we put around our body, so our quality of air, and it can be air pollution or mycotoxins, or if you are around, chemicals or something like that, it can really have an effect on not only your brain health, but your physical health. Also your water, as we've seen in, not so distant events of like Detroit and the water being contaminated, and how, that can have an effect on brain health and physical health. And then also, as we'll talk about with our foods, we want to be really sure. I think people are like, oh, what's the big deal about organic food? But it is so important. And so we really want to make sure that the ones that are really highly contaminated, it's called the dirty dozen. And then the ones that have lower susceptibility to contamination by pesticides and herbicides are the clean 15. And so if you're on a limited budget, definitely buy those dirty dozen, and you can get that off the EWG website. It's like strawberries and blueberries and spinach and those types of things. Make sure that you invest in those. And if like a small thing of strawberries is like $5, $6, $7 in the off season, you might want to really eat seasonally and locally for those types of things. Also, another thing is what we put on our bodies. I think this is probably a little bit more relevant for women versus men, because women typically use 23 to 25 products a day, where men are usually less than 5. But a lot of the parabens and phthalates and things like that that are in health and beauty aids, they get absorbed in our skin within 5 seconds to 7 seconds, and they can be endocrine disruptors, which can also affect physical health. It can affect fertility. It can affect your microbiome. It can also affect brain health. And so those are, a lot of really important things. One thing that we're also finding is that mold in homes, and we're really seeing that in places that have been recently flooded, or just through all the different weather systems, things like that. living in a moldy home can actually increase the mycotoxins in the air, which can also affect brain health. And what they're finding is that you breathe in the mycotoxins, and amyloid plaque actually accumulates to protect the brain from the mycotoxins. And the amyloid plaque is what is really, causing Alzheimer's symptoms. So that was a mouthful. Each one of those things I could talk for hours on. So hopefully I didn't, lose you all right there. But I think, really touching on those areas and doing what you can, just starting with one small habit in each area is really a good idea. And using those things that Austin Perlmutter spoke about, was it last week or 2 weeks ago? Can really help you to kind of implement those in an easy way that's going to be, something that you can do on a day-to-day basis. Any questions or comments on that? Okay, I'm going to move
I
forward.
love it because I think they all really work together, especially I think of it like an upward, you're building upward momentum, because the more you practice these things, the easier it gets. And also the healthier your brain gets, the more likely
Mhm.
you are to do these things. So
And
there's
more energy you have to do
that.
it, the better you feel. So I'm going to move into talking about the gut microbiome. And I know, Joe, you've introduced this topic, so I felt pretty comfortable presenting it again, but it is really the basis of what I wanted to talk about today. So the gut microbiome is really the totality of microorganisms like bacteria, viruses, protozoa, fungi, in their collective genetic material present in the gastrointestinal tract. And it's unique to everyone. So many different things affect how your microbiome develop. Anything from, were you C-section or vaginal birth? If you were a vaginal birth, then your microbiome is going to be a lot more healthy than a C-section baby. If you were breastfed or formula fed, and if you had rounds of antibiotics as a kid. And so all of these different things really affect everyone's unique microbial signature. And most of the species in there belong to these two families, the Bacteroidetes and the Firmicutes. And that ratio is really important. And we found that those who have higher Firmicutes species actually are more prone to obesity. And so these little bugs in our, these little phyla in our microbiome really have an effect in terms of like how our behaviors play out and how our physical, outer, um, I guess like even our weight can play out as well. So any alterations to the gut microbiome can have profound effects in terms of brain and behavior. And it's really the diversity in the gut microbiome is a huge indicator of mental health. And I bring that up because, as you talked about, that superhighway connecting the gut with the brain is the vagus nerve, and there's so much communication that goes on with that. Now, this is super important in terms of substance use and addiction. The gut-brain connections might be affecting the pathogenesis, the start of substance use disorders. And so you can see there's a 2019 article published on this. And these changes in diet, and substances and stress can alter the microbiome. And when the gut microbiome is altered, it can have dysbiosis, which is really disrupted homeostatic balance. And when it's dysregulated, then there's different neurohormones and different neurotransmitters that are making its way to the brain. And the gut microbiome has found to be dysregulated in response to psychostimulants, to alcohol and opioid use, to substance abuse. And we're really kind of wondering if it's the chicken or the egg. And so is it that someone has a gut microbiome that has dysbiosis and they're more predisposed, that they're more likely to have a substance use disorder? Or is it that they have a substance use disorder and then their gut microbiome is disrupted and can lead to these other things? Or is it just this strong interplay of this, really cycle that happens with the gut microbiome? And I say this because we can eat a lot of like really healthy things. You can be just, having lots of walnuts, having lots of, wild caught salmon. But if your gut is a mess and you have gut dysbiosis, it's kind of like, cleaning up, but not turning off the faucet. And this is kind of how I view modern conventional medicine. In some ways, we start to treat the symptoms, but we forget to look at the root cause. And so one of the main things I want to talk about and hit home today in terms of diet and brain health is that you really have to clean up the gut first. If any of you guys are more interested in how to do this, Joe Pizzorno has this amazing book called The Toxin Solution, and he walks you through this 9-week program. It's really beautiful, where the first 2 weeks, he just talks about what is a healthy diet. So you do 2 weeks of just the healthy diet. And then the next 2 weeks, you focus on gut health and you take certain herbals and eat certain things for that. And then the next 2 weeks, you focus on liver health and then kidney health. And it really opens up your detox channels so that when you do continue to eat, healthy foods, you're just going to really, have more benefit from it. Because, you can take probiotics, but the saying is that you really can't plant flowers in a junkyard. And so if you have a messed up microbiome, if you have a messed up gut, then it's probably just going to make you a little bit more sick, or really not going to matter that much if you're eating all this healthy food. So that's really the first place to start. And we're just really, as I said, living in a toxic world where, heavy metals from amalgam fillings or mycotoxins such as mold, particles, pesticides, insecticides, health and beauty aids, air pollution, all those things can really affect the microbiome, affect the gut. And so if we can clean it up first and not let those chemicals in, then that's really going to be the first place to start. And just a few, one thing for another thing is like using plastics. We all know that BPA plastics aren't good, but hormone disrupting chemicals negatively impact our health and economy through increased healthcare costs. So avoid all food packaging and go-to containers and reduce your exposure to toxic chemicals like PFAS. And this is a lot. I mean, we can't all walk around in a BPA-free bubble, but I think just being more aware, like being educated that these things can affect you, is really important. So in terms of brain healthy diets, I think when one decides that they're going to start going down the path of health, it's a lonelier path. It's a harder path. It's kind of like those two paths diverged in the woods, and I take the one less traveled by. But once you get on that path, then you can really branch out in a lot of different directions and still lead to health. And so, all roads lead to Rome once you're kind of on that path. And I think there's a lot of dogma. There's a lot of, different people saying that one diet is better than the other. But honestly, like if you go down the path of, really making conscious, healthy choices, more than likely you're going to continue to go down that healthy path and avoid disease. Does that make sense?
I think it makes perfect sense. I mean, if you go to Netflix and you watch a documentary on the health benefits of being vegan, you'll be convinced, right? I'm going vegan. I did that. I was
Right.
vegan for a year. And then you watch another one on, the health benefits of the paleo
Paleo.
diet. And you're like, oh, I'm going paleo. And then you go like you watch all the YouTube and Joe Rogan podcasts on like the carnivore diet where you just meat. And all these doctors have amazing studies and amazing results. So it's like, who do you believe? So I love the imagery of saying, okay, first, let's go down the path of a healthy diet and kind of cut out the junk. And then from there, you've established this foundation. You
Mm-hmm.
have options that best suits your lifestyle and maybe your morality and some of the choices that you want to make around what you eat and how you live and all of these things. So I love that. It's not that there's a, a definite wrong way. once you make the right decision. You sort of park.
Right, exactly. And I think thinking about that and opening it up a little makes people have much more success. I think if there's like, oh, I have to eat like that for the rest of my life, forget it, I'll die early, you know? Or once they're on it, then they become really rigid. Like you said, like that is the thing. It's called orthorexia, where you're concerned about everything you eat and wondering if everything's going to cause difficulty. And so really kind of opening it up in that space and trying to make the most healthy choice most of the time,
Wow,
and one that suits you.
orthorexia. That's the first time I've ever heard that term, orthorexia.
Mhm.
I feel
It's a
like that's
thing.
exactly what I was going through, like when I was
Yeah, and it's
stressing so hard
stressful.
about all that.
It's
It
really
is.
stressful.
Yeah,
Mhm.
especially when you've dealt with the trauma of seeing somebody you love go through a brain disorder, and then you start learning more about brain health and how it affects cognitive decline. Of course, your guard is going to go up and you're really going to stress out over this stuff. It's a very natural reaction.
Absolutely. But again, like even if you have this perfect diet, if you're stressed out and not taking care of the E, not taking care of your emotional health, then it kind of is, a little bit defeating. And so just trying to, doing the best that you can on all those different areas. So Joe, I'm over time. I don't know. I'm fine. Are you guys fine? I talk a lot.
We'll take you. I mean, there's
Okay.
absolutely. And
Okay.
gang,
I'll
feel free to
continue
type
going.
your
If anyone
questions
needs
into
to
the
pop
chat.
off, I
And
totally want to respect your time.
no, I think we're good. Yeah, thank you for that. But gang, feel free to type your questions into the chat. And we're going deep into this subject. And if you're not sure what something means or you want to just double click on it, please do.
And so Michael Pollan said this, and this was probably 20 years ago. He published just a really simple book. And in there, he said, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. And I think that kind of sums it up. That seems like the good rules to follow. And when I say eat food, eat real food, like actual food, not Franken foods, not processed foods. And so these are the diets here on, is that your right? Is it your right too?
That's all right.
Okay, everyone's right. And so the diets here are really the ones that are most supported in the literature to um, have a positive effect on brain health. And that's not even all of them, but these are the most, the most studied. And they're even kind of poorly studied. I think just diet and nutrition articles, just it's a really hard thing to really look at, because what are people really eating? And unless you kind of lock them up in a lab and measure their food and measure their excrement, like you don't really know. And so these are the ones that are out there. I think we're all familiar with the Mediterranean diet, and that's probably the most relaxed of them all. So for someone who feels they're at low risk, that just wants to kind of live a healthier lifestyle and down that path, Mediterranean diet is still going to allow whole grains. You're still going to be able to have bread, you're still going to be able to drink some wine. And, it's really not, it's mostly like eat mostly whole foods, mostly fruits and vegetables, really make good choices with that. And then the DASH diet is actually for the control of hypertension. And so it's a little bit more stringent in terms of things like salt, but it kind of has the same fundamental principles. The MIND diet is very much a combination of the Mediterranean and the DASH, with a little bit fewer restrictions in terms of fruit. It will be only like the dark colored berries that you can have, because most of the other fruit is really high in sugar, high in fructose. And then it also limits the number of carbohydrates that you can eat as well. And I list all these here because you might want to look them up if these are ones that you might want to follow. But again, I think there's just some simple principles to them. The IFM is the Institute of Functional Medicine, and they've come up with the mito diet, which is the mitochondria diet. And I think the most important thing, mitochondria is the basic building blocks of our cells. And so it's feeding the mitochondria, and you really want to focus on having sulfur rich vegetables and other things that are really going to, really extend the health and the life of your mitochondria. Most of the research that's being done with Alzheimer's diets is starting to be based on an alkaline keto diet. And so the keto diets that are out there on the internet are really not healthy, are really not good. Those high fat ones that really rely on a lot of butter and a lot of bacon and not a lot of greens are really, you might lose weight in the short term, but they're really not for long-term health. Alkaline keto diet is something where you have a lot of fruits or a lot of vegetables, some berries, and then you are really also getting your fuel from a fat source such as olive oil or avocados or olives or sometimes coconut oil. And many people will start to check their ketone levels with a ketone meter and make sure they're in ketosis. And that is something that's going to help in terms of Alzheimer's disease, because one of the theories is that Alzheimer's disease is diabetes of the brain, where the insulin receptors stop taking up glucose in certain parts of the brain. And so the ketones give the brain a different fuel source. And if you convert to a ketosis diet, you can start using ketones to fuel the brain. And for people with Alzheimer's disease, that might give them a little bit of a boost in terms of their thinking abilities. We don't know enough about the keto diet, where if it's something that's healthy for people who do not have brains in crisis to be on it long term. But it does seem like kind of toggling back and forth between this might be a healthy thing. And it was first started for neurological disorders back in the 1950s, where they treated kids who had epilepsy with ketone diets, and that really helped to regulate the epileptic spells. And then they went to the seizure medications, and now a lot of the clinics for kids with seizures are going back to ketone diets, which is really kind of interesting. And then Walter Longo is just an amazing researcher who came up with the longevity diet. Again, it's very similar to the Mediterranean, but a little bit more restricted, more looking at introducing a lot of omega-3s from fatty fish, and just really a lot of fruits and vegetables in the diet. And then has anyone heard of intermittent fasting or engaged in fasting at all?
I do. I actually probably straddle the line between intermittent fasting and the keto flex diet. Like I pretty
Mm-hmm.
much 90% of the time I'm doing keto, but I don't eat until midday and I only have 2 meals a day. And it's a super healthy. My wife and anybody that watched me make these smoothies says that they're super gross because I put in a lot of olive oil and
Water.
basically any vegetable I have in the fridge, olive oil, avocado oil. If I've
Mm-hmm.
got mushrooms left over from the night before, I'll throw them in my smoothie. But that's really all I eat during the day. And then at nighttime, I'll do like a lot of greens with a nice choice piece of meat. That's like a healthy piece of meat. But yeah,
Joe,
intermittent
that's
fasting is
fabulous.
something
That's
I like to.
great. Yeah. And then the intermittent fasting, typically that can mean a lot of different things. And it's kind of, again, one of those things that the lay public has really picked up now. But one of the things that we typically teach to patients is that, have your last meal of the day fairly early and then don't eat again overnight for at least 12 hours. And for those that have more cognitive issues, we have them go, up to about 14, sometimes 16 hours for that fast. And it's twofold. It kicks your body into ketosis. So just going without food kind of depletes your glycogen stores. And so that fat is more ready for fuel rather than using glycogen. But then also during that time, generally it's overnight when you're sleeping, your glymphatic system can really wash through your brain and take out the trash. That's the time when your cerebral spinal fluid washes through your brain and takes out amyloid plaque. In fact, missing one night of sleep or having one night of chronic of significant sleep deprivation can actually result in a small buildup of amyloid plaque. It can happen rapidly. So you want to be, having your body not consumed with digestion during that time. So if you eat right before bed, your body's digesting the food and really not able to really clean out the brain. So it's kind of that twofold process with the intermittent fasting. People have also done, so there's the intermittent fasting, which is kind of that, or time restricted feeding is what other people call it. But then other people have really gone on extended fasts, either water fasts, or Walter Longo has the fasting mimicking diet. And so again, like that, something that should probably be medically supervised, isn't necessarily healthy. But the thought is that you start to regenerate stem cells at about day 5 of having that fasting mimicking diet, or having the water fast.
So Dr. Locken, I'm sure you're going to address this, but the question came up with the chat. Where does sugar fit into all of this?
Right. I think sugar is the devil. And
Tell us how you really
pretty,
feel.
yeah, I know. And my kids don't like that. My kids eat, and I also, so I think that, but I'm also mindful of not being dogmatic about anything. So there's always a place for sugar, but I also think that sugar can really contribute to a lot of different health issues, and especially brain health issues. And kind of what I said before is that it can be that diabetes of the brain, and so the insulin receptors in the brain are really unable to take up sugar after, after a period of time.
So I think there's another question. This is sort of the forehand volley to your backhand, which is, I hear this one a lot. It's like, well, what about honey? Or what about like organic this or natural that? I think it gets real fuzzy when you're talking about like honey and glucose or uh, fructose from organic fruit, or maybe fruit juice, this whole area of like safe, healthy sugars. And I think honey falls into that category. So what's your view on that?
Yeah, my view is that there are levels of bad, but all sugar is pretty bad for brain health. You can't avoid it altogether, because even like berries will have some sugar, but you really want to choose low glycemic index berries, or like a fourth of a green apple. Or if you're going to have a banana, it should be like a green banana, like a fourth of a green banana, because it's going to have limited levels of fructose in there. And then things like agave or honey, really use in, extreme moderation. Manuka honey does have some antiviral and antimicrobial benefits to it. But I view all of those things, especially if we're talking about a brain in crisis and we're trying to get someone into ketosis, having any amount of sugar is really going to work against that. Artificial sweeteners, however, are even worse. They can actually burn out insulin receptors a little bit quicker. And we're finding more detrimental health effects from overuse or long-term use of artificial sweeteners. And so I guess like my levels of bad are super bad artificial sweeteners. Next bad, or probably super bad, is high fructose corn syrup, then artificial sweeteners, and then cane sugar. And then we're kind of, moving down in terms of like agave, then honey, then manuka honey, and kind of going down the chain. And so the interesting thing is after you go without sugar for a period of time, and usually it's only about 48 hours, you start to have a decreased need for sugar and even crave it less, and things taste ridiculously sweet to you. And so, over time you can kind of build that in. I think in our culture right now, everything has added sugar in it. So it's really, a very a maverick act to give up sugar. But I think if you can work towards that and kind of go down those levels of bad, I think that's good. I'm going to use my husband as a really good example. So he's from the South, and when I met him, he was drinking like a vat of sweet tea a day. I'm not even kidding. It was like huge. And over time he got it down to like half and half. And then he had a health issue and decided to give up sugar altogether. And he had his sinuses cleared up. Like he had like all of these sinus infections, like chronic sinus infections. And after he gave up sugar, those were gone. His, digestive issues cleared up. And it was just really kind of amazing to see that transformation. And now he's way better about it than I am. He's like, no sugar at all. And I'll be like, well, maybe I'll have a little bit now and again. Yeah. Did that answer the question?
2 thumbs up.
Okay. And so what we really want to work towards is a brain healthy diet to decrease inflammation. Again, inflammation is kind of that underlying cause, that turning off the sink of inflammation. Dysbiosis, which is, issues with the microbiome and issues with the gut. Insulin resistance, so having low sugar. Metabolic syndrome, which are things like hypertension, all those types of things. And then one of the things that we're finding as well is that food directly affects mood in terms of contributing to anxiety, contributing to depression. And so all of these things, will start to improve once you start on a brain healthy diet. So diet comparisons, the ones that I just listed over there, they're really not diets, but lifestyle change. And I think that's the thing. I think that's, find what's right for you, find what feels good for you, find what you will follow. If there's, and I've had this before with patients where they came in and they're like, I just can't give up X. And it's like, okay, don't give up X, but give up A through D, and, just kind of make it work for yourself. If there's something that you just can't, live without, then keep it in, but, try to shore up on some other areas. The diets also all focus on whole foods, but they vary slightly in their allowance of whole grains or grains at all, their allowance of dairy, because dairy can be very inflammatory. And again, there are kind of levels of bad. So, probably milk is going to be the most inflammatory, or like ice cream, something like that. But then yogurt is going to be less so, and so there's going to be kind of levels of dairy that are less inflammatory. They vary in the types of fruit allowed. As I said, the MIND diet is really more focused on berries and not high fructose fruits, and their allowance of saturated fats. And so we had a conversation about this before, Joe, about how the fat-free craze was really not good for our brains, although you want to avoid vegetable oils and fried foods and things like that. You do want a level of healthy fats like olive oils, and in some cases, short chain fatty acids such as saturated fats like coconut oil or MCT oil as well. And then they also vary in terms of their allowance of sugar. Like the Mediterranean diet, it's really okay to have a dessert now and again, whereas if you're on more of an alkaline keto diet, you really pretty much avoid sugar.
Here's a question, and it is pretty direct. Are there certain foods or diets that have specifically been shown to contribute to anxiety? And I think the flip side of that would be, are there foods that you can eat to calm or relax yourself?
Yes. And I actually, how we made this connection is through the Center for Nutritional Psychology. So whoever asked that question, go to the Center for Nutritional Psychology, CNP, and they have a whole library of literature. You can go to diet and anxiety, and you can see all the articles for that. And usually it's the processed food, the just some of the things that we'll talk about on the next slide, that once you eat them, they really contribute to anxiety. And so the best thing that you can do is you're kind of the N of one, you're your own experiment. And so do a food mood diary and kind of see like where your anxiety is and what you've eaten over a period of time, and follow that. And more than likely, you're going to see a connection between, if you're eating something that just is, increasing your anxiety, you can make a connection with that. So the basic foundational rules, a brain healthy diet should include nutrient dense, anti-inflammatory foods, a lot of leafy greens, colorful vegetables, nuts, berries, olive oil, wild caught fish rich in omega-3 fatty acids. And then also, there are still studies to show that coffee still improves cognitive performance. And I'm super happy about that. I'm a big fan of coffee. You want to drink clean coffee that doesn't have mycotoxins or acrylamide in it. And so just be sure it's well sourced for that. And then dark chocolate. And usually, you want to go with 70% or above. And then in red wine in moderation. But again, if you're trying to avoid any type of substances, all alcohol is actually a neurotoxin. So even though it might have some healthy effects with it, the amount that you would have to drink for the healthy effects far outweighs, what the negative effects you would get from it if you are trying to get away from alcohol use. So the basic foundational rules are to remove processed foods, the packaged foods, things that are, one of the rules that I kind of use that's been helpful to me is that if it should have less than 3 to 5 ingredients, and I should be able to pronounce all the ingredients. And kind of a story, when my son was little, and I'm not a mom that like makes them eat certain things. I mean, I'm trying to lay a good foundation of healthy habits, but he wanted to bring Lunchables to school because all of his friends had Lunchables, and I'm like, oh no. And so we went to the store and we took the Lunchables and I had him turn it over, and he was like in kindergarten or first grade, and he was a pretty good reader at that time, but I asked him if he could read or pronounce any of it, and he said no. And then I'm like, well, count how many ingredients, and he couldn't count how many were on there, and he's like, Mom, I don't want this. I'm like, okay.
So this is a good question. If they're serious about the science behind this health, is it best to start to work with a general nutritionist or primary care doctor or someone else to start working through the personal analysis?
Yeah, I think that would be fantastic. And so I'm a little bit partial, but when I was in Seattle, I met a lot of nutritionists that were trained through Bastyr, and they are phenomenal. So I know a lot of them are now doing like telehealth. One's from Bastyr University, or dietitians or nutritionists that have Institute of Functional Medicine training, I think are going to be, you can be, they're not going to follow the old food pyramid, because we know that's not, and they're going to really be someone that's going to be helpful to work with and work with you. And if you guys want to reach out to me back channel, I know a few that are absolutely phenomenal that I could give you recommendations as well.
Yeah, and the founder of the Center for Nutritional Psychology, who introduced us, has a lot of resources on her website. So Dustin, I'll be sure to provide you with that link, as if you're interested in working with somebody that has this specific type of background, which I think is the right approach. You could find those resources on that website. So I'll make sure that you get that.
Yeah, I would definitely, say that that's a wonderful, that's really an investment in yourself to do that. So other things, like I think we went over it, the sugary drinks, artificial sweeteners, vegetable oils are highly inflammatory. Their ratio of omega-6 is much higher than omega-3s, and so it leads to inflammation. Processed meats with nitrites or nitrates are unhealthy. Refined carbs and fried foods. So try to remove those from your diet. And if you remove those, like that's more than half the battle. Like if you're not engaging in that, and then what you want to add in are all those things that we talked about. Terry Walls is a really interesting functional medicine provider. She actually reversed her own multiple sclerosis, and her foundational principles are to every day eat 3 cups of greens. So arugula, spinach, kale, 3 cups of sulfur-rich vegetables. So that's going to be like your onion, cauliflower, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, and then 3 cups of antioxidant-rich fruits and vegetables. And the antioxidant-rich, are the ones that are deeply colored. So beets or raspberries, blueberries. And if you have that, one, you're really going to fill yourself up with that. You're still not going to be that hungry after eating all of that. And also that's going to really be the recipe for feeding your mitochondria, for really building those, those foundational building blocks of our cells. And then, filtered water, herbal teas, and well-sourced protein. Things like a good acronym is SMASH for fish. So sardines, mackerels, anchovies, salmon, wild-caught salmon, and herring. I love anchovies and sardines, but everyone thinks I'm a total weirdo because of it. But those little small fatty fish don't have a lot of mercury or other heavy metals in them, and they're very healthy for your brain.
I was once
And then
told that
if you
sardines taste like eyebrows after a long sweaty run.
I know, I love it. No, that's interesting. I don't know why I like them. I'm just happy I like them because they're actually pretty easy to throw in a backpack as well.
So that's a good question, because it's like one of the toxins to avoid would be like the heavy metals and things. But
Great.
most of the fish that you just named, with the exception of wild caught salmon, when I see them at the store, they're always in those little tins. So are those okay to eat?
Right. You can get a BPA free tin. Yeah. But again, it, getting them fresh is probably better, but I buy them in the tin if it's BPA free.
Cool. So look out for that on the label. I'm sure it'll have it.
And most of them are BPA free that you'll see in like Whole Foods or, a health food store.
Great.
And then, if you do engage in eating red meat, and I think red meat is fine from time to time, you probably don't want to eat it every day. Then also look for grass-fed, grass-finished beef. And then also not only focus on what you eat, but focus on when you eat. I think in terms of, our bodies respond so much better to rituals and habits. So eating consistently, not snacking throughout the day, because again, if your body's constantly concerned about digestion, a lot of other important things just don't get done. We're really not meant to be snacking all day long. And really, if you, one thing I found, I don't know if you found this too, Joe, but when I went to more of a chew meal and did a lot more fasting, like it just frees up a lot of time, like you don't have to be concerned about where you're going to eat next or what you're going to eat or snacking. It just, freed up a lot of time. And I found when my food world got smaller, other things, like I was able to expand other things. And I really try to kind of keep in, my bright lines. I know kind of what I'm going to eat. And that really saves me when I go into a situation that I'm not like haggling back and forth with myself, like, should I eat it? Shouldn't I eat it? I just know that, nope, that's really not in my bright lines. I'm not going to eat it. And I really don't veer off unless I've carefully planned it and thought it out. There may be a moment of weakness now and again, but most of the time, I'd say 90% of the time, I follow those rules, and it really helps. And it keeps me healthy, keeps me having high energy, and just, hopefully it's protecting my brain. So what you eat, when you eat, why you eat. I think emotional eating can sometimes replace addiction. I've seen that many times. I've also done a lot of bariatric surgery evaluations, and oftentimes there's been an addictive issue with substances in the past that kind of morphed into more of a food addiction. So really monitoring, is it due to anxiety, due to depression, due to other things, due to boredom? I know a lot of people have, talked about gaining the COVID-19. So, that's a thing as well. And then how you eat, just sitting down, eating mindfully, being grateful for the food. And actually, that really serves your microbiome, because if you're just kind of doing it really fast, you really don't have time to really rest and digest and absorb the vitamins and nutrients like you should. All right. I think that's really all I had. I went way over time. I'm so sorry. I hope this is helpful. And my last slide, I love this one. It's just, you really, that the health of your brain is really in your hands. You have the ability to take good care of your brain and to keep it healthy.
I love that picture. What a great one to end on. When I saw it, obviously it's a brain, but it's like a community. You can't do this stuff on your own. We're not all 100% self-sufficient. We live in a community, a society where we have to appreciate and respect each other. And working with people that grow healthy food and supporting the people that do that and the ethical treatment of animals and all of this stuff makes an impact not only for us on our individual level with brain health, but also the communities that we live in and the type of society that we want to build. And I'm just so glad that we got you to come on the show today and work with us and talk through all of these questions that there's so much information around, and you simplified some great topics for us. And I really value your time, and I thank you so much for coming on today. I really do appreciate you, Dr. Locken.
Thank you. Thank you guys so much. It was my pleasure.
Thank
Have a
you.
great evening.